Imagine walking into a voting booth, pressing a button, and, trusting that your choice is recorded exactly right. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the mechanics of alleged election theft, based on a massive interview by a retired CIA officer named Gary Burnson.
Yeah, and it's a blueprint that completely upends how we think about the basic infrastructure of digital trust.
It really does. But before we go a single step further, I need to look you, the listener, right in the eye. The source material we're diving into today contains explosive, really highly charged claims that touch on major political figures, across the entire spectrum, both left-wing and right-wing.
Right, absolutely everyone.
Exactly. So our mission here is absolutely not to endorse these claims. We are not here to take a political side or validate the overarching theory at all. We are strictly here to impartially report, unpack, and analyze the complex architecture of this alleged conspiracy, like exactly as Burnson describes it.
Yeah, we're basically mapping a highly technical schematic. We just want to understand the how and the why of the global mechanisms he's alleging, without getting lost in all the partisan noise.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because, you can't fully grasp the weight of these claims without first understanding the resume of the guy making them. Who is Gary Burnson?
Well, Gary Burnson is he's a pretty heavy hitter in the intelligence world. According to the text, he spent 4 years in the Air Force and then 23 years as a senior operations officer in the CIA.
Oh, wow. So a full career.
Very much so. I mean, he literally led the entry into Afghanistan 20 years ago.
Yeah.
He was the architect of the operation that put Hamid Karzai in power.
Wait, really?
Yeah. He speaks Persian. He served as a chief of station in both the Middle East and Latin America. So, we are examining an analysis from someone who spent decades building and dismantling international espionage network.
Which is what makes his current focus so, I don't know, jarring. I mean, you have a top-tier CIA counterterrorism expert, a guy hunting al-Qaeda, suddenly, investigating voting machines.
Right. Seems like a huge pivot.
But looking closely at his account, this investigation didn't actually start with ballots at all. It started with narcotics and oil.
Right. He and his partner, Martin Rodil, were initially tracking the cartel of the Suns in Venezuela, which is run by Nicolas Maduro.
And the financial scale here is, well, it's almost mythical. Burnson claims this cartel has pilfered roughly $2.7 trillion.
Yeah, let that number just sink in for a second. $2.7 trillion.
With a T?
With a T, exactly. I mean, if this cartel were a recognized nation, that level of illicit wealth in, oil, drugs, and gold, it would make them one of the largest economies on Earth.
That's insane.
It is. And when an enterprise amasses that much capital, their whole objective shifts. You're no longer just trying to evade law enforcement.
You're trying to run the country.
Precisely. You're trying to preserve state power to protect the treasury. You need an absolute airtight guarantee of political survival.
Okay, I'm trying to connect those dots, though. How does a massive Venezuelan cartel transition into writing code for, electronic voting machines?
Well, the catalyst was a massive crisis of power in 2003. Hugo Chavez was the dictator at the time, and he was facing a national recall referendum.
And he was going to lose, right?
Exactly. According to Burntson's intelligence, Chavez was looking at his internal polling and realizing he was going to lose. He was on the verge of being ousted.
So he panics and turns to his closest geopolitical ally, which is Havana.
Right. Cuban intelligence steps in. And their advice to Chavez is actually very pragmatic. They tell him, look, if you run a traditional paper-based election, you cannot control the variables.
Because paper's just too messy.
Yeah, it's messy, it's physical, it's hard to manipulate on a nationwide scale without, getting caught red-handed. So they advise him to pivot entirely to electronic voting machines.
To mathematically control the outcome. But, Venezuela in 2003 wasn't exactly Silicon Valley. They didn't have a massive tech sector ready to roll out custom voting infrastructure just like that.
No, they didn't, and that's where the recruitment comes in. They actually identify 3 Venezuelan-American engineers who were running a tech company in the United States.
Okay.
These engineers had studied at Simon Bolivar University in Caracas, which Burnson notes has a highly sophisticated computer lab linked directly to MIT.
Wow, okay. And according to the timeline, these engineers are basically flown directly into Ramp 4, the presidential ramp at the airport in Caracas, for a face-to-face meeting with Chavez.
Yeah, and his top lieutenants. The mandate was straightforward: build a system that guarantees I do not lose this recall.
So how do they actually build it?
Well, building that system required two things. They needed the software source code to manipulate the data and the physical hardware boxes to, actually run the code.
Right.
And the hardware solution they arrived at is incredibly resourceful. They flew to Italy and approached Olivetti.
Olivetti, like the typewriter company.
Yeah, the very same. But they also manufactured touchscreen lottery machines.
Okay, wait.
Yeah, so the Venezuelans purchased thousands of these lottery machines, shipped them back to Caracas, flashed the hard drives with their custom-built source code, and basically executed the 2004 recall election on them.
I am really struggling with the math on this strategy. I mean, a lottery machine is designed to be a random number generator, right?
Right.
But a rigged election requires the exact opposite. You need a highly specific, predetermined numerical outcome. So to rig a national election, they essentially reverse-engineered casino slot machines.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
And it works. Chavez wins the 2004 recall.
But I have to push back here on the logistics. I mean, it's one thing to run a rigged lottery machine network in your own backyard, where you control the military and the press. How does a localized Venezuelan proof of concept scale up into an international operation?
Well, the expansion relied on a franchise model. Once the cartel realized this technology actually worked, they started exporting it to their ideological allies.
To build a voting bloc.
Exactly, to solidify a friendly bloc across the continent. Brunson claims they assisted the Kirchners in Argentina, Evo Morales in Bolivia, and Rafael Correa in Ecuador. They were essentially franchising the architecture of digital manipulation to keep their regional partners in power.
Okay, but if they're spreading this across South America, how does it cross the ocean into the United States? That's a huge leap.
It is, and Brunson tracks the first U.S. entries into very specific local races. We're talking Democratic primaries in Cook County, Illinois, and state primaries in New Jersey.
So they started small?
Very small,
Yeah.
embedding the technology at the county level. But this infiltration didn't go completely unnoticed. Brunson highlights this really fascinating historical footprint involving Carolyn Maloney.
The Democratic Congresswoman from New York.
Right. She actually flagged this. She wrote a letter to the Treasury Secretary at the time, John Snow, explicitly warning that Venezuelan-backed entities were infiltrating U.S. election infrastructure.
I need to stop you there, though, because, a letter from a congresswoman doesn't automatically stop a multinational corporation. What was the actual mechanism that forced a change?
Well, that letter triggered a massive federal response through a body called CFIUS.
Right, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States.
Exactly. Think of CFIUS as a highly secretive federal bouncer. It's an interagency committee that reviews foreign investments to see if they threaten national security.
Right.
When a foreign entity linked to a hostile government starts buying up critical infrastructure, like voting systems, CFIUS has the legal authority to step in and force them to divest.
So CFIUS forces Smartmatic into a corporate shell game.
A highly complex one, yeah. Smartmatic was ordered to sell. Initially, they tried to transfer ownership to a holding company they controlled called SKO, which was this offshore board entity designed to hide the true ownership.
Seeky. Did it work?
No, CFIUS saw right through the paper trail and blocked it. They were then forced to sell the technology to an American company called Sequoia.
But the scrutiny just follows the tech, right?
Yeah, exactly. CFIUS came knocking on Sequoia's door next, questioning their ongoing ties and, whether they were truly independent. Under that pressure, Sequoia sold the assets to Dominion.
A Toronto-based startup.
Right, which Brunson claims was initially backed by George Soros. This corporate shuffling basically resulted in a global division of labor.
How so?
According to Brunson, Smartmatic retreated to manage the global manipulation operations from abroad, while Dominion, utilizing that same core technological lineage, dominated the North American market.
Wow.
Yeah, eventually placing machines in every U.S. swing state. As Brunson puts it, they quote-unquote cut the world up.
Okay, but if the software lineage is bouncing from Venezuela to Canada to the U.S., where are the physical boxes coming from? You can't run a digital election without thousands of localized hardware terminals.
Well, what's fascinating here is the geopolitical evolution of the supply chain. Those original Italian lottery machines were just a temporary patch. As the operation expanded globally, Brunson alleges the Chinese government saw a huge opportunity.
Wait, China?
Yes, they became heavy investors and manufacturing partners. The actual voting hardware began being produced in massive factories about 60 miles outside of Beijing.
But why would Beijing risk an international incident just to help a Venezuelan cartel build voting hardware.
Because it grants them unprecedented access to the nervous system of Western democracy.
Okay, that makes sense. But they couldn't just ship critical voting infrastructure directly from Beijing to, like, a polling place in Ohio. U.S. import security protocols would flag it instantly.
Absolutely.
So how do they launder the hardware?
Through Taiwan.
Uh,
Right. After the machines were built in China, they were shipped across the strait to Taiwan. There, the equipment was white-labeled. They legally stamped and branded the hardware as made in Taiwan.
which completely bypasses U.S. technology import restrictions.
Exactly, because we generally treat Taiwanese electronics as secure, friendly manufacturing. But the danger, Bernson claims, is that this hardware was manufactured with deep backdoor capabilities.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning it allegedly allowed the Chinese to actively communicate with the machines once they were deployed on U.S. soil.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Having backdoor hardware and manipulated software is one thing, but executing the theft on a Tuesday in November across thousands of disparate local precincts without tripping cybersecurity alarms, that requires unbelievable coordination. How do you pull the strings live?
You don't do it from the United States. According to the dozen engineers Bernson's team eventually recruited and debriefed, the command and control center was established in Belgrade, Serbia.
Serbia. Why on earth would you route American voting data through the Balkans?
It actually provides the perfect blend of jurisdictional distance and plausible deniability. Serbia is outside the immediate reach of U.S. federal law enforcement, and it has a technical infrastructure that's very friendly to Russian and Chinese interests.
Makes sense.
Bernson describes this massive research facility in Belgrade, staffed by 98 system administrators. It was a coalition of Serbians, Venezuelans, and Chinese operatives.
And what were they doing?
They were running the entire operation on highly advanced Huawei servers. The allegation is that live voting data from U.S. swing states was stored in Belgrade and actively communicated in real time to servers in Hong Kong.
So live data is bouncing from a local scanner to Eastern Europe to China. But if you're listening to this and wondering how someone sitting in Belgrade physically alters a paper ballot that you just handed to a poll worker, Brinson says there are 14 different manipulation techniques hard-coded into the system. Let's break down the one that absolutely blew my mind, the quarter-inch trick.
Oh, yeah. It is a stunning exploitation of how optical scanners actually work. Imagine a standard paper ballot.
Okay.
The digital scanner at your local precinct is programmed to expect a precise 1-inch margin on the side of that paper. It uses that margin to orient the document and read the bubbles.
Right, pretty standard.
Well, according to Bernson, the operatives simply alter the programmed margin expectation by 1/4 of an inch.
But 1/4 of an inch is virtually invisible to the naked eye. The voter assumes everything is totally fine.
Exactly. To the voter, the ballot looks perfect. They feed it into the machine. But that slight margin discrepancy acts as a physical bug within the hardware. After scanning about 50 or 100 ballots, the machine registers the cumulative error and throws a jam code.
It completely stops counting.
Yes.
Creating a localized crisis.
Which is exactly the goal. The machine is down, there's a line out the door, and the local poll workers start to panic. They call for technical support.
Laterally.
A representative from the voting machine company arrives, tells the room they need to recalibrate the scanner, and inserts a proprietary thumb drive.
And everyone standing there, it just looks like standard authorized IT support.
Exactly. But Bernson claims that thumb drive does much more than just clear the error. It actually injects the specific software patch required to initiate the theft algorithms for that individual precinct.
Wow. It's brilliant. They manufacture an artificial hardware failure to legally justify injecting the malware in broad daylight.
Right.
But wait, if they are manipulating the digital tally inside the machine, what happens during an audit? If a state orders a recount, the physical pieces of paper in the box won't match the manipulated digital spreadsheet.
You are hitting on the biggest vulnerability of the entire operation, and Bernson claims they solved it by simply purchasing the supply chain.
Purchasing the supply chain.
Yeah, he alleges the cartel operation bought out several of the major paper suppliers and the independent audit companies themselves.
Right away.
Furthermore, in many jurisdictions, you are not legally permitted to hand count the physical paper ballots during a standard audit.
Wait, really? What do you use then?
The law requires you to audit using the machine's digitally captured images of the ballots.
Which brings us to how they handle mail-in voting. If you are auditing digital images, how do they fake absentee ballots?
Through what they call the absentee ballot scanner trick. When a stack of mail-in ballots arrives at a county office, they are fed into a high-speed scanner.
Okay.
That scanner takes a high-resolution digital photograph of every single ballot. Say it processes a batch of 100 votes.
Right.
Before that batch of 100 images is permanently saved to the local hard drive, the software intercepts the process. It deletes the 100 genuine photographs and replaces them with a file of 100 fabricated ballot images sent directly from that command server in Serbia.
Unbelievable.
So when the state conducts its audit, the investigators look at the machine's digital files, and the fabricated images perfectly match the rigged numerical tally.
I am still hung up on the math, though. I
Mhm.
mean, if you take a deeply conservative county and suddenly the machine says they voted 80% for a liberal candidate, human beings are going to notice. The statistical anomaly would be just glaring.
The system architects are very well aware of that risk. Burnson details a technique called shaving. Yeah. The operation employs statisticians who map out county-by-county demographics a year in advance. They know better than to try and flip a deep red stronghold entirely. Instead, they shave the margins.
Okay.
Think of it like a hacker skimming fractions of a penny from millions of bank accounts. No individual notices their account is short, but the aggregate theft is massive.
So if a conservative candidate is expected to win a county 70-30, the algorithm quietly shaves a few points across hundreds of precincts, so they only win like 68-32.
That's the mechanism. And to maintain the statistical camouflage, they enforce a really strict operational rule. They never use the same cheating technique in contiguous counties.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, if they deploy the quarter-inch margin trick in one county, they might use the absentee image swap in the county right next door. By randomizing the methods, they prevent independent data analysts from spotting a uniform mathematical anomaly across a geographic region.
So what does this all mean? If we are looking at a $2.7 trillion cartel, Cuban intelligence origins, Chinese hardware laundering, command servers in Serbia, and manipulated local audits. I mean, this is a sprawling, multi-nation, highly coordinated operation.
Massive.
And Burnson claims this has been running with significant capacity since 2010. I have to push back hard here. Burnson is a decorated CIA officer. How does a multi-decade espionage operation on domestic soil go completely unchecked by the United States intelligence community?
Well, that is undeniably the darkest and most alarming assertion in Burnson's entire interview. His explanation for the inaction of the CIA and the FBI is that the U.S. intelligence apparatus is deeply institutionally compromised.
But wait, he says in the text that he took this evidence directly to an FBI officer in Washington, D.C.
He did.
And the officer's response wasn't to open a file. The officers told him to flee the city, to run to Switzerland because his own government would destroy the investigation and throw him in jail. How does a former chief of station rationalize his own government turning on him?
He rationalizes it by pointing to the legendary human intelligence capabilities of the Cuban government. Burnson claims that Cuban intelligence, fueled by the virtually unlimited financial resources of the Venezuelan cartel, has achieved an unprecedented penetration of the U.S. national security apparatus.
How deep are we talking?
To understand the scale, he compares it to the most infamous spies in American history. People know about Ana Montes, right? The senior DIA analyst who spied for Cuba for decades, or Robert Hansen, the FBI agent who sold devastating secrets to the Russians.
Yeah, those cases crippled American intelligence for years.
They did. But Burnson claims that this Cuban and Venezuelan operation has inflicted 10 times the damage of Hansen or Montes.
10 times?
Yeah. He alleges we currently have more compromised assets walking around in senior positions than at any time in U.S. history.
And he backs that up with a very specific, recent, concrete example, right? Manuel Rocha.
Yes. Manuel Rocha is the proof of concept for this kind of infiltration. Rocha was a highly respected American diplomat. He served as the U.S. ambassador to Bolivia. He held top-level security clearances and regularly sat in on highly sensitive military briefings at Southcom.
Let's define Southcom for a second, just so everyone knows. That is the United States Southern Command. They are the military body responsible for all U.S. operations in Central and South America. So Rocha had the keys to our entire hemispheric defense strategy.
Exactly the point. And a few years ago, Rocha was arrested and confessed to being a covert agent for Cuban intelligence for over 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah, he was recruited in Chile back in the 1970s and patiently seeded into the State Department, playing an incredibly long-term intelligence game.
And the kicker to this whole narrative is that Burnson claims the U.S. government didn't even catch Rocha on their own. Burnson and his partner, Martin Rodil, two private citizens, are the ones who tracked him down.
Right. They flew to Puerto Rico, sat down with FBI counterintelligence, handed them the compiled file, and effectively forced the government to act.
And the blowback for doing this kind of rogue whistleblowing was severe. The text notes that Rodil has survived multiple assassination attempts.
Which really underscores the extreme physical danger of attempting to reverse engineer a trillion-dollar cartel operation. And, they did not achieve this in a vacuum.
Right, they have.
Bernson credits a man named Patrick Byrne for providing the massive financial backing required to expose this architecture.
Patrick Byrne spent tens of millions, didn't he?
He reportedly spent tens of millions of dollars to recruit a dozen of the actual Venezuelan engineers who built and managed these systems. And for their own safety, they had to secretly move these engineers out of South America,
To where?
first hiding them in the Caribbean and eventually relocating them to a secure computer lab in Switzerland. That was literally the only way they could safely break down the source code and prove the engineering without interference from compromised U.S. authorities.
Taking a step back to look at the whole board here, the architecture we have just mapped out is staggering. According to Gary Bernson, we are looking at communist cartel software originating in Venezuela, Chinese hardware, white-labeled to bypass import laws in Taiwan, live command servers operating out of Serbia, and compromised local audits in the U.S., all shielded by a deeply penetrated intelligence community.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. And again, as we stated at the very beginning, our role here is not to validate these claims or pick a political side. We are simply mapping the blueprint provided in the source material. But regardless of your politics, understanding the mechanics of how digital trust can theoretically be manipulated, how a margin can be slightly shaved or a digital file seamlessly swapped, is absolutely vital for anyone trying to navigate the modern information age.
I agree, and it forces a total reevaluation of what national security actually means in the 21st century. I mean, if the architecture of trust, the very machines we use to count our collective voices, can be offshored, white-labeled, and networked globally, it raises a profound question. In a fully digitized world, does a nation's sovereignty still reside within its geographic borders, or does it only extend as far as the weakest line of code in its supply chain?
If you cannot verify the code, you cannot verify the country. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of trust and technology. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep learning, and we will see you next time.